I knew something was off the second I saw her standing on my dock with a clipboard and a walkie-talkie like she was commanding a SWAT team. Her name was Nadine Thistle, head of the Lakewood Shores HOA, and she had the temperament of a feral cat in a thunderstorm. I dealt with her before petty warnings about mailbox height, accusations that my lawn was too aggressively green. But this was a new level of crazy. I was carrying 2 bags of ice down from my truck when I saw my fishing boat, my pride and joy, being hooked up to a flatbed tow truck. Right there, on my dock. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" I shouted, dropping the bags, ice scattering across the gravel. Nadine turned around like a villain in a low-budget soap opera, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. "This boat is on HOA property," she said, pointing at the dock like she was Moses parting the Red Sea. "Unapproved watercraft are subject to removal. You should have read the guidelines, Mr. McCrae. I'm Owen McCrae, and I've lived here longer than that woman's had the same haircut. My house backs up to Lake Evermere, and I bought it dock and all 15 years ago. Nadine moved in 3 years ago and somehow got herself voted HOA president within 6 months. Ever since, she's acted like the lake was her personal moat. That dock is mine," I said flatly. She scoffed. "The lake and its access points are community property. You can't just claim a dock like a raccoon marking territory." "It came with the deed," I said, but she was already turning to the tow guy. "Proceed," she barked. "He can file a complaint if he doesn't like it." That's when I sprinted past her, climbed onto the boat, and planted myself in the captain's chair. "Sir, you need to get off that boat," the tow driver said, looking more nervous than assertive. "Not until you unhook it," I said, folding my arms. "This dock, this boat, they're mine. Nadine's about to learn what due diligence actually means." Nadine stomped toward me, heels clicking like a metronome of entitlement. "If you don't comply, the HOA will fine you for obstruction." I reached into the waterproof case I kept inside the hull and pulled out a folder. I opened it and held up the crisp, notarized document like it was a winning lottery ticket. "This is the deed to my property," I said, pointing to the highlighted section. "Lot 15 includes private dock access and 100 feet of riparian rights. That means the water, the dock, and everything attached to it is mine. Not yours, not the HOA's." She blinked. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Would you like to read it, Nadine?" I asked, holding it closer. She snatched the document, eyes scanning like she was hoping to find a typo that would save her. I turned to the tow driver. "You touch this boat again, I'll have you up for trespassing." He backed off immediately. "I didn't know, man, sorry. She said it was—" "Yeah, I know what she said," I cut in. Nadine finally spoke. "This has to be outdated. The HOA charter was rewritten in 2020, I grinned. "And this deed was recorded in 2008, which makes it grandfathered in. Your charter doesn't override property law." She looked like she'd bitten into a lemon soaked in vinegar. "Unhook it," she snapped at the tow driver. As he lowered the winch, she turned on her heel and stormed back up the hill toward her golf cart, nearly tripping over a lawn flamingo on the way. I parked the boat back in its spot with a satisfying hum of the motor. As I tied it off, I noticed a few neighbors watching from across the cove. Some gave me a thumbs up. One guy actually clapped. The thing about people like Nadine, they don't just stop, they regroup. They scheme. And I had a gut feeling this wasn't over, but I also had a scanner, a printer, and a copy of every legal document tied to my property. Let her try me. By Tuesday morning, I noticed something odd. Someone had replaced the padlock on the gate leading to the shared lake path that cut behind my house. It wasn't mine. The new one was industrial grade, thick as a bratwurst, and it had a little laminated sign zip tied to the chain. "Lake access temporarily restricted, HOA maintenance zone." I'd seen enough maintenance zones in my life to know they don't usually involve padlocks and sneaky signage. I grabbed a thermos of coffee, walked the perimeter of my fence, and spotted a security camera mounted high on the HOA's new pole, angled straight at my dock. They'd put up surveillance without so much as a notice. I called up Lenora, my neighbor 2 doors down. She worked the early shift at the county recorder's office and knew her way around land easements. When she picked up, she didn't even let me finish. "I saw the lock this morning. They're trying to cut you off from your own access path, she said. That's a Class B encroachment if it interferes with deeded rights. Want me to pull the property line maps? Already ahead of you, I said. I've got the original plats in my workshop. But if you can get an updated overlay with their new camera poles marked, that'd help. By noon, I had a fresh survey map in my inbox and a hot cup of blackmail brewing. The camera was installed 4 feet inside my property line. That meant Nadine's crew had trespassed, drilled into my soil, and wired HOA surveillance gear onto private land, all while claiming my dock wasn't mine. I printed the map, laminated it, and taped it to the side of my mailbox. Then I walked to the gate, took a photo of the lock and sign, and emailed it to Officer Braddock at the township precinct. He was the type who didn't like HOA drama unless it spilled into criminal territory. I figured this qualified. That evening, I found a folded letter stuck under my doormat. No envelope, just a typed message on HOA letterhead with a ridiculous line at the top: cease use of watercraft due to pending review. I read the whole thing standing on my porch with a flashlight. It claimed my boat lacked a compliance decal, and that, until the HOA completed a hydrological environmental impact study, all lake use from private docks was suspended. I walked straight to my garage, pulled out the old camcorder I'd used to record my kids' soccer games, and focused it on the dock. I set it to motion activate. If they came for the boat again, I'd have them on tape. Things escalated by Wednesday. Nadine called an emergency HOA board meeting at the clubhouse. I showed up wearing my old Coast Guard windbreaker, the one with the insignia on the chest. I wasn't trying to be intimidating. I just wanted them to remember that I wasn't some guy they could push around with bureaucratic nonsense. There were 7 board members seated up front, all pretending this wasn't a circus. Nadine stood at the lectern, a white binder in front of her that looked more like a prop than anything useful. We've received multiple complaints about unauthorized motorized watercraft, she said, not looking directly at me. In order to protect the integrity of Lake Evermere, the board is proposing that all private watercraft be subject to HOA registration and inspection. This includes a fee structure which will support lake preservation efforts. A guy in the 3rd row raised his hand. What's the fee? She pretended to flip a page. $500 annually. Murmurs rippled across the room. I stood up. You don't have jurisdiction over that lake. Nadine exhaled sharply. Mr. McCrae, please wait until public comment. I don't need to wait. You're proposing a fee on private property usage on a lake not owned by the HOA, and you've already tampered with access. That's illegal, her voice sharpened. The HOA maintains the surrounding land and common areas. That gives us stewardship rights. No, it gives you responsibility for maintenance, not ownership. I held up a manila file. These are the original development contracts from when this neighborhood was built. The lake is managed by the county. You have no authority to regulate individual riparian rights. Someone near the back muttered, "He's right." Nadine's eyes narrowed. Then perhaps we'll involve the county ourselves. Already did, I said. I spoke to the environmental supervisor this morning. He said if you're falsely claiming regulatory authority, they'll open a case for misrepresentation. And if you collected any fees under that pretense, that's fraud. Dead silence. I walked toward the front and laid the camcorder on the table. This recorded footage from last night shows your contractor installing a surveillance camera 4 feet into my private lot, without notice. That's criminal trespass. I've submitted it to Officer Braddock, and he's already requested a copy of your HOA's vendor contracts. She looked like she wanted to vaporize me on the spot. One of the younger board members leaned in and whispered something to her. She didn't respond. Then someone else spoke, a woman I didn't recognize. I live on lot 22. My kayak was moved last week. It was chained to my private rack and someone cut it loose. That opened the floodgates. 2 more residents stood up, one whose paddleboard had been tagged with a violation sticker, another who'd been told they had to register their canoe or face fines. All of them had docks or racks clearly marked in their deeds. Nadine tried to regain control. Let's not get sidetracked by misunderstandings. The board is simply trying to ensure safety standards. No, you're not, I said. You're abusing power and hoping no one reads the fine print, but we've read it, and we've saved every notice you've sent." I turned to the room. "If you've had your property altered, moved, or restricted by the HOA without due process, I suggest you file a report with the township. I've already started my claim." That hit harder than I expected. By the time I left, 6 others had cornered Braddock in the parking lot, each with photos or timelines of similar incidents. Thursday morning, I got a call from the precinct. "The county's opening an investigation," Braddock said. "They're looking into unauthorized surveillance, property interference, and misuse of HOA funds. Apparently, a few other residents submitted financial statements showing some strange charges." "Let me guess," I said. "Lake study fees," he paused. "And camera installations billed as community safety upgrades on private land." He told me they'd be issuing a notice for Nadine to turn over HOA financials within 72 hours. That afternoon, a manila envelope arrived at my door. No return address. Inside were photocopies of meeting minutes ones never made public. They detailed a vote to gradually reclaim lakefront access for equitable community use, spearheaded by Nadine. Only 3 board members had voted yes. The rest abstained. There was also a receipt for the surveillance camera purchase paid for with emergency funds meant for storm drain maintenance. I didn't know who had sent it, but I knew what to do. I scanned everything and emailed it to the county fraud division. By Friday, 2 unmarked county vehicles were parked outside the HOA clubhouse. Nadine didn't wave that day. She just stood by her mailbox staring at the ground like she'd never seen it before, and I made sure the camcorder was still rolling. By Saturday morning, the entire neighborhood was humming like a kicked beehive. The clubhouse's bulletin board, usually reserved for bake sale flyers and lost cat notices, had been stripped clean. In its place hung a single typed notice held by 4 thumbtacks. "Emergency board reorganization vote Monday night, 6 p.m. Resident attendance strongly encouraged." No signature. No HOA letterhead. Just plain paper and nervous energy behind it. Someone on the board was jumping ship. I spent the better part of the morning reviewing the anonymous documents that had landed on my porch. Whoever sent them had access to internal records, real ones. There were scanned receipts, meeting logs, and most damning of all, a contractor invoice submitted under the name of a company called Silver Ridge Consulting. A quick search showed that it didn't exist beyond a P.O. box in the next county. The name on the registration, M. Thistle, Nadine's husband. I forwarded everything directly to the County Fraud Division's lead investigator, along with a timeline of the HOA's recent activity. An hour later, I got a return call from a man who introduced himself as Investigator Halloran with the state's Department of Regulatory Oversight. "Mr. McCrae, I reviewed the files," Halloran said. "We're escalating this. There are elements here that suggest deliberate misappropriation of funds and falsified vendor contracting. We've also contacted the state attorney's office to prepare a subpoena." "Do you need a statement from me?" I asked. "We'll need a formal affidavit, and we'll likely request you speak at the review hearing next month. But for now, keep your security systems active and don't engage directly with Miss Thistle." I agreed, though I had no intention of avoiding her. Not while she was still swinging her weight around like nothing had happened. Later that afternoon, I received a knock on the door. It was Marlene from across the street. She was in her 70s, always wore gardening gloves even indoors, and ran the unofficial neighborhood grapevine. "They blocked off the clubhouse parking lot," she said. "Cones and all, said it's being fumigated in the middle of the day," I asked. "That's not the weird part," she said. "I saw someone wheeling out boxes, big ones. 2 guys loading them into a blue SUV with no plates." I stepped outside and looked down the street. The cones were still in place, but the SUV was gone. "Did you recognize the guys?" "Couldn't see their faces." One had a hoodie pulled up, the other had a clipboard. I checked my camcorder footage from the night before nothing new, but I remembered something else. The clubhouse had an old maintenance shed behind it, mostly forgotten and tucked between 2 pine trees. If Nadine was moving records, There'd be something left behind under the pretense of a dog walk. I circled the lake path and made my way toward the shed. The padlock was new. The hinges weren't. I held my phone steady and took photos through the gap in the wooden slats. Inside were 3 large plastic containers, each labeled Archive. One had its lid cracked open, revealing stacks of manila folders with HOA stamps. I sent the photos to Halloran without comment. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "We're sending someone tonight. Don't approach the shed again." And Mr. McCrae, thank you. That evening, 2 unmarked SUVs parked beside the maintenance trail. I watched from my porch as plainclothes agents moved with flashlights and gloves. They didn't stay long. By the time they left, the containers were gone, and a fresh "Do Not Enter" notice had been nailed to the shed door. Sunday passed in quiet tension. No one saw Nadine. Her husband's car was gone too. The clubhouse remained closed, and the HOA hotline went unanswered. But the neighborhood's private Facebook group was another story. Screenshots of the fake vendor receipts had been posted anonymously. So had a photo of the padlocked lake path gate. Comments rolled in by the hundreds. People demanded refunds, explanations, resignations. Someone posted side-by-side images of Silver Ridge Consulting's non-existent address and a screenshot of a recent HOA expense report showing a payment of $12,000 to that same entity for lake erosion consulting. By Monday afternoon, a new flyer went up beside the meeting notice, this one bearing the official seal of the County Fraud Division. Ongoing investigation into alleged misappropriation of HOA funds, resident statements encouraged. Contact information below. The emergency board meeting that night was standing room only. Halloran had warned me to stay civil, but the moment I stepped into the clubhouse, it was clear I wouldn't need to say much. The room was electric. People weren't angry, they were furious. Nadine was nowhere to be seen. In her place sat a visibly sweating vice president named Greg Lunsford, a man who'd previously done little more than organize the annual chili cook-off. He cleared his throat and tried to speak over the din. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, Miss Thistle will not be present," he said. "In light of current events, the board has opted to suspend all HOA enforcement activity until further notice." That wasn't enough. A man at the back stood up with a printed spreadsheet. "Are you going to explain this $35,000 consulting contract to a company that doesn't exist?" Greg looked like he'd swallowed a bag of sand. "We were misled," he said. "Some of us weren't informed about." I cut in. "You signed the expenditures." He froze. "We have your name on 3 different approval forms," I added. "Each one tied to a payment that went to a P.O. box registered to Nadine's husband." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman from the front row chimed in. "I want a motion to remove this entire board." More voices followed. Dozens. Someone passed out printed ballots. A vote began right there in real time with a paper trail and witnesses. Greg tried to object, but his voice was drowned out. Within minutes, the tally was overwhelming. The entire board was voted out. A temporary committee was formed on the spot, composed of 5 residents with no prior ties to the management group. By the time I left, people were already discussing forming a new, volunteer-based advisory council to replace the HOA altogether. A few suggested dissolving it entirely. That would take more time and a formal petition, but the momentum was real. The next morning, I got a call from Halloran again. "We're filing charges," he said. "Several, actually. Fraud, misuse of public trust, falsification of financial records, and at least 1 count of wire fraud. Nadine Thistle and her husband are currently being sought." "Gone?" I asked. "Left the state Saturday night. But we're working with local authorities in the next jurisdiction. They'll be found." Later that week, a news van showed up near the lake, camera crew in tow. A reporter asked for a statement. I declined, but others didn't. One by one, people shared their stories about the fines, the surveillance, the boat removals. The segment aired that weekend. By Monday, the story had gone regional. Somehow, Nadine had underestimated us. She thought people wouldn't read, wouldn't stand, wouldn't fight. She was wrong. The lake never looked better. Not because the water changed, but because the people around it did. Neighbors started helping each other again. Tools were shared. Lawns were mowed without warnings. The path gate was removed and a new sign put in its place. Welcome to Lake Evermere. Enjoy your stay. I repainted my boat dock the following weekend, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I added a small plaque to the post near the waterline. Property of Owen McCrae. Try me again. By the following Wednesday, a subpoena was officially delivered to the temporary HOA committee's mailbox. It wasn't just a formality, it was a full-blown demand from the state's Attorney General's office, complete with a deadline and a warning about non-compliance. The new committee, made up of actual residents and not power-hungry puppets, didn't hesitate. They handed over everything: board minutes, payment logs, emails, and even cell phone screenshots from former members who had quietly jumped ship. Meanwhile, I took a long overdue fishing trip. Not far just out to the middle of Evermere, where the water was glassy and the birds didn't care about fines or decals. I dropped anchor, tossed a line, and let the silence breathe. For the first time in years, the lake actually felt like it belonged to the people who lived around it. The peace didn't last long. Late that afternoon, I got a call from a woman named Deputy U.S. Marshal Reese. Her voice was clipped, efficient, and free of small talk. "We've located Michelle and Martin Thistle," she said. "They were picked up in South Carolina this morning at a short-term rental registered under an alias. We're coordinating interstate extradition now." I raised an eyebrow. Alias. Michelle was using her maiden name. They paid cash for the rental, no credit cards. Car was registered to a shell company, same one used to buy the surveillance equipment. I leaned back in my seat. "So they planned this." "Looks that way," she said. "They had 4 boxes of HOA documents with them. Most were marked for shredding." It wasn't surprising, but it still hit like a punch to the ribs. They hadn't just been stealing, they'd been covering their tracks all along, anticipating fallout. And they might have gotten away with it, if not for the neighbors they underestimated and the chain of receipts they left behind. That evening, a community meeting was called, not in the clubhouse, which was still technically a crime scene, but in Lenora's backyard under a string of old cafe lights. About 40 people showed up, carrying lawn chairs and coolers, some in work clothes, others in flip-flops. The mood was different: less anger, more resolve. Lenora stood on a makeshift platform made from 2 sawhorses and a plywood sheet. "There's been enough damage," she said. "To the neighborhood, the trust, and the lake. It's time we clean this up, not just the books, but the way we live here." Greg, the former board VP, sat near the back, silent. He didn't speak, and no one asked him to. He'd already hired an attorney and was cooperating with investigators. It wouldn't save him from civil liability, but it might keep him out of jail. I took the floor next, but I didn't talk about Nadine or the Thistles. I talked about the property line. Not the legal one, the invisible one that runs between neighbors, the one that keeps things decent. Respect, fairness, courtesy, the real lines that matter. "We can't let this happen again," I said. "Whatever replaces the HOA, it needs to be transparent, accountable. No more secret votes, no more fines printed on office copiers. If someone wants to lead around here, they better know the difference between serving and ruling." Applause broke out. Not thunderous, but steady. Earned. The next morning, the county's forensic audit team released a preliminary report. The numbers were worse than anyone expected, nearly $87,000 misallocated across 2 years. Half of that went to fake consulting firms. The rest was siphoned through maintenance projects that never happened, landscaping that didn't exist, inspections no one ordered. And a second surveillance system, this one never even installed, but fully paid for. What sealed it, though, was the recording. One of the new committee members found a USB drive taped under a bottom drawer in the clubhouse office. On it was a single audio file. A board meeting Nadine had secretly recorded, trying to strong-arm hesitant members into approving an emergency expense package for lakefront acquisition. Her words were unmistakable. "We cut off access, they'll cave. They don't know the charter. Most haven't read their deeds. They'll hand over their docs if we just keep pushing." That recording went straight to the DA's office. By Friday, charges were formally filed. Nadine faced 6 felony counts, including wire fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy to defraud a homeowners association. Martin got hit with money laundering and falsifying corporate records. Their assets were frozen. Their accounts seized. Their faces made the local news, and then the state news, and finally a brief segment on a national consumer fraud report. And just like that, the tyrants of Lakewood Shores were no longer a neighborhood problem, they were a national cautionary tale. The fallout was real. Some homeowners were refunded. Others filed civil claims. But the most important change came quietly, 2 weeks later when the residents voted to dissolve the HOA altogether. It took a formal petition and a county hearing, but it passed. 74% in favor. The charter was nullified. The board disbanded. The clubhouse was converted into a community center to be managed by volunteer rotation. The lake remained under county jurisdiction as it always had. But now, docks were respected. Boats stayed where they belonged. And the only signs posted were the kind that said catch and release or no wake after dusk. One afternoon, I found a small wooden box left on my dock. No note. Inside was a carved compass etched with the words, "For the one who held the line." I didn't need to know who left it. I mounted it on the bow of my boat. Weeks turned into months. Neighbors started holding cookouts again. People waved at each other instead of watching from behind blinds. The old surveillance pole was replaced with a birdhouse. The padlock that once barred the path to the lake was melted down by a metal artist down the road and turned into a sculpture. A rusted chain twisted into the shape of a broken crown. The final court hearing took place in mid-July. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, beside Lenora and 2 other residents who'd testified. Nadine wore a gray suit and a face that looked like it had aged 10 years. She never looked up. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 2. Martin got 3 years, suspended pending restitution and supervised release. The judge didn't mince words. "Authority without accountability is tyranny," he said. "This court does not exist to protect fraud dressed in policy." Afterwards, some of us went to the diner down the road. We didn't toast or cheer. We just ate pancakes and laughed about everything but the HOA. That chapter was done. One evening, I walked the lake path and saw a boy fishing off a neighbor's dock. He waved. I nodded back. No clipboard, no fines. No one watching from a golf cart with a walkie-talkie. Just a kid and a lake. Exactly how it should be.